Okay. Friends, I think we are live today. Today is a very interesting and fascinating discussion because we have a very special guest with us. But before I introduce you or tell you about him, those who follow on Twitter already know who is coming, but those who do not, I will tell you who's coming. But before that, anybody who runs a YouTube channel, it's mandatory, and I'm doing the mandatory thing. Please subscribe to the channel if you're watching it for the first time. If you have been watching it, then please keep on sharing it. Your word of mouth has made the channel grow leaps and bounds, and we are touching 45,000 subscribers. We are only 44,000 some hundred just in the lockdown period. So thank you for sharing it. Thank you for listening so long. We have averaged now 40 lakh minutes in the last 28 days for hearing these important discussions. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing on WhatsApp, emails, wherever you share. Today we have a very distinguished guest with us. Somebody who is an engineer, who is an MBA, who is a mathematician, who is a best-selling author. So he covers a lot of fields with his intellect, with his passion, and with his unique perspectives. His recent book on Veer Savarkar has become a bestseller already. So you all know who am I calling? It is none other than Dr. Vikram Sampath. Thank you, Vikram, for finding time to come on our channel and have a conversation with us.
Thank you, Ishkaran. Good evening, and it's so amazing to see that in such a short span you managed to capture the online space too as effectively as you have with the electronic media, with very very incisive, and detail-oriented, sessions that you've had. I've been listening to your earlier sessions, and it's so heartening that. We were talking about this long format actually working, where people are actually listening to a 1.5 hour talk or 2 hour talk, which is in itself, I think, a credit to you and to the audience.
I think it's entirely to the audience, because when I started, I discussed with a few friends who were online, and they all said make 10 minutes, 15-minute clips because attention span is very short. I said, what is the point of 2-minute clips that we can anyways do on TV, or we can just tweet on Twitter? If we are doing YouTube, we might as well get into the depth of a conversation, because it has to have nuance. And you are writing a 2-volume now, because see, there is so much of nuance on any topic we discuss. So firstly, because the topic is all Marxist lies, and you have been to some of you studied India, you've studied abroad. So what is the education difference in systems that you found in India, or when you travel abroad, or when you deal with students there? The education difference you feel in our schools, our colleges, versus what is happening in the West?
That's an interesting question, actually, and maybe since the topic is linked to history, we'd probably stick to just the history part of the education system. Now, even whether it's for the right or for the wrong, I mean, even we've had reports of how in UK. The British children don't even know much about the atrocities committed by the East India Company in India, or even including the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So many things about the Raj has been concealed to them. And why does this happen? There's this famous saying of George Orwell that he who controls the past controls the future. And I don't think he just controls the future, but also the present in terms of our notion of identity as a society and as a culture. So the subject that we, all of us, including me actually, and I'm sure you also, would have got so bored to read in school history, which is only rote learning, and who succeeded whom, and which war was fought in which era, and all of that, which doesn't, I mean, beyond just the factual details, it didn't add much to our understanding of, say, ourselves as Indians, or the story of India per se. So that subject is now so hotly contested, and it becomes the epicenter for culture wars. It intrudes modern politics and political discourse in ways that we can't even think of. So that's why most of the countries abroad, they've managed to rewrite, and history is a discipline which is constantly in the quest of being rewritten, because there is absolutely nothing called an absolute truth when it comes to history. It is the paucity or the availability of facts and documents and records at your command. So some famous historian had said every work of history is an interim report. So people are going to keep revising that report time and time again. So I may have written whatever you described as the bestseller on Savarkar, but tomorrow if you manage to unearth something better, something totally contrary to what I have found, you can just turn my entire research on its head and my book can go to the dustbin. So that is the ephemeral nature of the discipline, and which also makes it intellectually so stimulating. Now, and there's this famous African saying, until and unless the story of the hunt is told by the lions, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So all these other countries that you spoke of, they've made this conscious attempt to revisit history for both these reasons. One is the nature of the discipline itself, where new trends, new ideas need to come out. The second is also the fact that it also there's a responsibility of history to create that sense of nationality, nationalism, a sense of society, a sense of identity, and so naturally people revise that. Whereas I think the problem when it come to India has been we've got so stuck with a narrative that was given down to us by our erstwhile colonial rulers, and that made worse, I think, post-independence by a group of historians whose approach to the discipline can be anything other than what can be described as toxic, where any dissenting viewpoint, any parallel narratives have never ever been allowed to flourish. Now, and traditionally, if I just probably just give a little brief about the history of Indian historiography, so to say, or the writing of history. So you had the ancient times where we'll talk more about that maybe as we go forward. But how did Indians keep their records or their history in the ancient times? What happened during the medieval times? In the British time, there were three categories of historians. One are these, Orientalists, William Jones and others who started the Asiatic Society, who were looking at India as this exotic country, the country which you had to explore and you had to actually, with this whole fascination for India. Then there were the colonialist historians who were also, a dual agenda. One is they never understood how history writing was done in the East largely and in India in particular. The other agenda was also political and religious, where you had to deride India, you had to deride Indian culture, tradition as being pagan, as being backward, because that suited the narrative of the colonial master, and it also helped in the larger agenda of conversions, so to say. So this narrative has always been one where our country has been shown as a land of losers. We have only lost battles. Battle after battle from the time Mahmud Ghazni came till probably 1947, we have not probably won any battle, and our history textbooks or our narrative is a laundry list of battles we lost. Now, if we've been losing only battles and we are still around as a civilization, there must have been something that we have won also, and and as a civilization we must have put some resistance. Our languages, our culture, our religions have survived despite 1,000 years of all these onslaughts, which goes to say that there must have been something that pushed back, which was there. So right from the mythical, Aryan invasion theory, which was propounded, till the later times, the colonial construct has always been that, you people are not destined to rule at all. You always need an external agent who will invade you, who will teach you culture, who will teach you how to govern yourself. So the Aryans too were outsiders, the Mughals were outsiders, all the Islamic invasions were from outsiders, and we, the British, came also as outsiders and gave you culture, gave you railways, gave you everything, education, modern facilities. So you just have to sit quiet and take all of this as your destiny, as for the beneficence of your rulers. So this colonial construct was largely also there. But what is important, Ishkaran, I think during during even the British times, was to counter this. There was a huge corpus of Indian historians who could be named as the nationalists. Bhandarkar, V.K. Rajwade, you had Neelkant Shastri, and I would also put Vinayak Damodar Savarkar in that list, Sir Jadunath Sarkar, R.C. Majumdar. all these historians who actually countered the British narrative, even in a colonial time when we were a slave nation, so to say. But then, quite ironically, what was allowed to us to do to provide a counter narrative under a colonial rule is not given to us in independent India, where this counter narrative to Indian history has not been possible. Thanks to the thraldom of the so-called leftist school, which in academic circles it's a combination of the Marxist school. There's this Anali school of French historiography, subaltern studies, all of this converging into what could largely be called, I see you raising your eyebrows, that's what it is. So a conglomerate of all of this called the leftist school of historiography or history writing, which has, I think, throttled all kind of dissent, any alternative viewpoints to a subject which thrives on dissent, which thrives on alternative narratives. Because if you're going by one single book, one single word, then I think it's not history you're dealing with, but the theological book of some faiths. But in history, there always have to be multiple books. There always have to be contesting narratives. And if there is no space for that, then I don't think there is much scope for the subject. And I think that is the reason for the downfall of the discipline in this country, vis-a-vis, a long answer to your short question of how it is abroad, where abroad there is this space that is made available for contesting narratives, which unfortunately here in independent India, we don't have.
Vikram, there are many things I want to ask from what you spoke, but one of the things I will start with is, do you think in India, in a peculiar way, history is never the history? In the sense, in abroad, if you go on to any issue, today we are having a fight that what Confederate generals did or did not do, but doesn't lead to a shift in votes. Whereas in India, if you say something on Tipu Sultan, you are from Karnataka, that is still an issue on which actual votes may get influenced, or so a large chunk of people believe. So somebody who is dead for centuries is still affecting your voting patterns in India. So in that sense, or take the other example also, you could have votes getting affected if you speak Ambedkar. So history in that sense, abroad they recognize history is history. It doesn't affect your current voting. In India, it is seemingly affecting your current voting also. So do you think that hampers our ability to do a critical analysis of a historical figure? And why is it peculiarly in India?
Yeah, no, that's completely true, because and it's also an irony that in modern India, like I mentioned, with so little regard for history as a discipline, and also history as preserving monuments or documentation that we don't have much interest in as a current society, we get so touchy about characters of the past. And so as long as there's a vote bank, people can't write an objective biography of, say, Dr. Ambedkar and bring out, as a human being, everyone needs to have pluses and minuses and faults. So if one does that, then you know what backlash even an Arun Shauri got when he wrote Worshipping False Gods. And Aurangzeb, Tipu Sultan, the list, Shivaji. When James Lane wrote whatever he wrote, which was offensive. Of course, the counter to that is never a book. It's you go and vandalize the Bhandarkar library in Pune, which is the storehouse of such valuable manuscripts. So I think we are a very emotional nation when it comes to these characters. A Padmavat can lead to burning of theaters. Bajirao Mastani. We didn't even know there was someone called Mastani till the time this film came, but suddenly we kind of get so excited just because maybe Bajirao was shown fictionally or non-fictionally to have to also be a human being who could have a romantic affair with a woman. What's wrong with that? So I think our whole idea of putting our characters on a pedestal and not thinking of them not so much as human beings, but some divine figures beyond reproach, beyond any kind of assessment, I think that becomes a problem. You did speak about Tipu Sultan, and so he's been appropriated in Karnataka. You had the Tipu Jayanti, which the Congress government did earlier, and which the BJP opposed. Now, in all of this slugfest, I think the casualty is history, where we tend to judge characters of the past by yardsticks we set today. To say Tipu Sultan was communal, secular, etc., at a time when these terms didn't exist, and also call him a freedom fighter and so on, the first freedom fighter of India, when that whole idea of fighting for the nation, etc., was not even there. That consciousness was not there in the country. You were fighting turf wars with to save your own personal honor, your personal kingdom with neighboring states. So that becomes problematic. And I think the biggest, I keep saying this repeatedly, that to save the discipline, I think politics and politicians need to exit it and create spaces where academicians and scholars, who are the ones who need to debate and discuss this, do that in a space which is open, which is progressive, and which again politicians have intruded in such a way that this cannot this atmosphere of tolerance is not there.
But Vikram, on Tipu Sultan, let's just take some of these contentious figures and let's try to put you into hot water as a historian.
My God.
And we must do that. On Tipu Sultan, see, I would say that till maybe 20, 30 years, except in parts where they knew what Tipu Sultan did, and some parts do not celebrate Diwali also, something I don't agree with. But not the atrocity. The fact that you give up a festival of yours, you have to. Anyways, that's a different debate. But what I want your thoughts on is, till a particular time, maybe 20, 25 years, or maybe even 15 years ago, Tipu Sultan, you had a grand serial on him as how he fought, which is in public memory, and you have an image of him as a grand freedom fighter built due to colonial narrative carried forward by leftist Congress narrative. But whatever he did, he was a deeply divisive figure. He was a person of importance to history. But by that logic, Hitler could also be of importance to history. But you don't start celebrating Hitler Day.
Yeah.
Do you? Sure. What is your view on that? That you think that he was a multifaceted personality who has to be celebrated? Or you think he was a person who was, as he himself called, sword of a particular religion, who had a particular ideology, who was waging that ideology, who was doing conversions, and should now be a person of historical importance, but not of historical celebration? How do you see it?
Ishkaran, I always have a problem when it comes to governments getting into the fray to celebrate all these things. I mean, we have 365 days, and you can keep celebrating some birthday, death day of somebody or the other, right? I mean, there's everybody. Someone has died or born on some day. So why should a elected government? And in 1950, we've turned our back on princely states and adopted a constitutional form of government. Most of these rulers of the past would follow principles by and large which would go tandem to our constitutional principles today, right? I mean, whatever we as a nation have. So as a group of people, it's fine. I mean, if there's a Tipu Sultan fan club which commemorates his birthday or whatever, and then has plays on him, has the serial that Sanjay Khan made, that is still fine. I think even the Congress party can probably hoist a flag in his honor in the Congress party office. But I think when the government of Karnataka on taxpayers' money is doing something like this, when as you rightly said, he's a deeply divisive figure, where parts of Karnataka and Kerala he's reviled even to this day. The Nayars of Malabar, who were treated in the most atrocious way. The Syrian Christians, so it's not even a religious issue, it's across the board. So in Mangalore, in Coorg, to this day, when this Jayanti thing happened, it was not the RSS or the VHP that instigated all the protests. Some were the Syrian Christian communities came out in protest. So you couldn't say that they were cahoots with the RSS. So it was a very spontaneous reaction to the kind of memories that are there through oral traditions, through family narratives, and all of that. The Mandya Mayangars, whom you mentioned, 700 women, children, men who were hanged from banyan trees in broad daylight in that region on the day of Diwali because he had an axe to grind with some other Iyengar who was against him. So these are very much a part of our collective memory and consciousness. So when the government of Karnataka, which is a symbol of the people of Karnataka, is actually commemorating any of this, I think it becomes very, very disturbing. So social report card of a monarch is also as important as, I think, there you can't just say economic progress, or he was the first one to bring out rockets and missile technology and all of that, and so we will commemorate. So there are pluses and minuses, so we could put all of that, and that's why I keep reiterating that the other extreme which the BJP government was suggesting here is also a little crazy, according to me, where we'll wipe out his name from the history textbooks. Now that is to me equally reprehensible, because you can't wish away your past. It's already happened. You don't like him or her, that doesn't matter. The fact that the person existed is a truth that you can't deny. So present these characters as with their pluses, with their minuses. Let the children, the students, the readers, let them decide where what they would like to believe of these people.
But Vikram, for a Tipu Sultan, would that not require a history textbook? I do not know. Do Karnataka textbooks cover this incidence of him hanging 700 people? Point is, if your text, that's where the problem starts. No, that if you are not critically analyzing, supposing you said he developed rockets and he did this, that's like saying Hitler made trains run on time, or Mussolini, for that matter, made trains in Italy run on time. So unless your textbook, as I said, a person of historical importance versus a person who's a hero, they are two very separate things. If you are being completely historical, then you write that he hanged 700 people, then you write other atrocities he did, then you write some of his farmans, which are very clear that he considers himself to be a holy warrior. So then you write that, and then let people judge. But if you brush aside all the negatives, and then you just cover him, that is where I feel the problem starts in our history books.
Totally agreed, completely, and I think that is the crux of the issue that we're talking about, which is what has been happening with our textbooks since, I think, the 1970s, with actually quite ironically, with the formation of the ICHR, the Indian Council of Historical Research, which had to foster this whole spirit of inquiry and all of that scientific temper in the discipline of history. So since we're talking about Tipu Sultan and Karnataka, there's this famous literature from my state, Dr. S.L. Bhairappa, who's written several books, and he was also part of the NCRT team under Indira Gandhi, and he writes in several of his writings that in meetings where he openly saw bureaucrats, so bureaucrats actually decide what Indian history is and what should be read and what should not be read. And when he sent dissenting notes to this, he was told that national unity will suffer if we create these narratives to young children. Now the foundations of national unity cannot rest on such flimsy whitewash and the whole thing of wishing away things. And I think that is again the biggest problem, where whitewash of the Marxist school of whitewashing the darker chapters of Indian history. Now to claim that temples were not even destroyed in the several centuries of Islamic invasions or conversions did not happen. There are so many who do that. There are people who whitewash everyone from Ghaznavi to Gori to all Aurangzeb and the entire tribe, and Tipu, of course. So to say that you need these heroes for a present day young Muslim man or woman to feel proud by whitewashing this. Now the albatross of the atrocities that these people committed does not rest on the shoulders of today's Muslims, and by converse also the to whitewash that to get national unity, I think that is more perverse, because I think worldwide, Ishkaran, history has created spaces where people can come and actually experience the genocides of the past. You have the Holocaust museums, whether it's in Germany, in Germany, in US, in Israel, and other places where people come. There's that sense of what happened in South Africa with Ubuntu, right? I mean, you go through that whole experience, you forgive, and you heal those wounds of the past, and then move on. move on towards a better future. But then the minute you put those wounds under a carpet, I think they will fester like cancer and keep coming back to haunt you. And that is exactly what has happened when it comes to India. These things never happened, and then you set fights among people who never, were probably enemies. You set fights between Indic faiths, Hindus and Buddhists and Jains and so on. I mean, Bakhtiyar Khilji's own court historian can proudly proclaim that my monarch went and burnt the Nalanda University. But then our eminent historians on the left would say, no, but actually it was a Brahmin conspiracy, a Brahmin beggar who put some torch which went off, and that led to the whole library going in flames, almost denying the whole genocide. So in the case of India, I think these victims of the genocide have a dual disadvantage. One is, of course, the trauma of whatever the ancestors faced. The second is erasure of memory and not even acknowledgement that this happened, belittling that whole pain, that whole trauma, and saying that you're just overreacting, just be nice, you're the big brother, so you need to take this all with on your chin and say let's move on. So I think that constant thing which happens in 1989, there's this famous circular of the West Bengal government, which was then under the Marxist rule. It runs to several pages, where actually, so the education ministry in West Bengal summoned all the textbooks of history across various classes and created 2 columns called Shuddho and Ashuddho. So, Shuddho, the Ashuddho part, the impure part, was where details were given that Mahmud Ghazni came so many times, the Somnath shivling was broken into pieces, and then since the theological demand was that to curb the faith of the kafir, the idolater, the idol had to be ground and then put on the steps of the masjid that would be built, so that every time the faithful would step on it, the religion of the kafir comes down. Now all these was made written as it is, quoting from the text of Mahmud Ghazni's own court historians. Now that came under Ashuddho and said all this will create problems, so let us delete that and just say, okay, Mahmud Ghazni came, maybe he just saw the Somnath Mandir and went away or whatever, and it just, then maybe a Brahmin lit a match which caught flame, and so the whole temple came crumbling down. That's exactly how our historical narratives have been, where deny the trouble ever existed, put it under the carpet, and now if there is a backlash, for how long would any group of people actually face it? And in the past, there have been several people, Sitaram Goyal, for instance, who's done such seminal work on the kind of tortures that the community faced. Dr. Meenakshi Jain and others who have also written extensively on this. Now these works need to come out in public. These works need to come out in our textbooks. And to this day, I think it's the bureaucrats who are sitting and deciding what our history is and what should be read by our students and our future generations. Until that happens, there is no scope for any redemption for this discipline.
Vikram, somebody on Super Chat asked a very important question which flows with this from what you said. He said, let's say example of Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal or Nilesh Oak, they say, why do left historians or academia block proper usage of research done by people from the nationalist wing or right wing? And it has still become easier, but earlier it was complete blocking. So one way was Marxist history, second was blocking of somebody like Sitaram Goyal. So how does it actually operate, this credentialism that you will not allow somebody to be published or to be taken seriously or to be taught? So if you could tell people about how does the process work, especially in the past, not today. Today, social media has broken some barriers. But how was it working in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? How was that process working?
That's a fascinating question. And in fact, I've written and spoken quite a bit on this in the past, where I've kind of put together certain tools and techniques. So if one actually sees what the so-called leftist school that I described, what are the standard operating procedures of this gang of people? If you kind of summarize that, I have a couple of points which I could go through. One is a very reductionist approach to looking at India and her past, where everything of our past is seen only through a very reductionist prism of the caste. And India as a oppressive society where everything that has happened is only class struggle, class wars between the oppressor and the oppressed, and that, to my view, is a highly reductionist approach to the way of looking at our past. Of course, I must hasten to add here that the ultra rights, complete on the 180-degree opposite of this would be a revivalist approach, where you say everything in the past, we had everything. We had aeroplanes, we had nuclear bombs, we had plastic surgery. We may have had many of that in whatever form, but to say that we were the best, so that is one extreme. And this is another harmful extreme which has ruled the roost so far. I think the sober discipline of history, the truth lies in the middle of these two extremes. The second would be, almost a near complete erasure of India's knowledge systems when it comes to various disciplines: philosophy, language, sciences, chemistry, alchemy, and metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, and all of this. And to almost say that everything, if there's anything good about our past, it's all attributed to our influence, maybe with the Greeks and the Romans, or with probably the influence of the Arabs, which is how we got our everything, including maths. So that's sort of an erasure, and thereby also underemphasizing India's contribution to other cultures and civilizations. So we have almost shown to be incapable of generating any rational knowledge of our own. Everything that we got was, and again, if you see the link, they are such faithful inheritors of the colonial historians who did precisely this. And there, Ishkaran, I think there's also something to say about the way of life in India and our knowledge systems too, where even forget political ideology, even when well-meaning historians in the 17th and 18th century, the European historians who came to the East and they were looking at documentation, keeping the benchmarks of, say, Greek historians like Herodotus and Thucydides and so on. So they were looking for Indian equivalents of that. And that is one reason why all of them who came from the West, they just couldn't understand what is this country. We don't have, even Al-Baruni in his Tehqiq-e-Hind in 1013, he mentions that the Hindus are, they have no sense of time. They don't have a sense of historical consciousness. Their history writing is all about myth making, tales, and there's no sense of chronology and all of that. And this is repeated by the colonialist and the Marxist historians in that same lineage, without understanding that yes, in India everything is never told to your face directly. There is a sense of abstraction in almost all our knowledge forms. So, for instance, if you have the Pythagoras Theorem, which the Baudhayana Sulba Sutras, it's contained in that, it's not going to tell you that the square root of the the square root of the sum of the two sides of a right triangle is equal to the hypotenuse. It's not going to be so directly told. It's going to be told in poetry. It's going to be told in a lot of roundabout, convoluted view. So where the researcher, the sadhak, has to go and find out what the truth is. Be it mathematics, be it even theology, the Shakta tradition in India, the pinnacle of that Shakta tradition is what is the Panchadashakshari mantra. Now, even this Panchadashakshari mantra is not given directly to the people in a book or whatever. There is mystery. There is a sense of search for that. So it is embedded almost like a Da Vinci Code in another text called the Lalita Trishati Stotra. So 300 verses. So if you actually see the 300 verses, they are actually a cluster of several verses. And the first alphabet of each cluster, if you take all of that together, that gives you the Panchadashakshari mantra. So that is how our knowledge systems work. And for people who don't have the sensitivity to understand, these are just very simple examples I'm giving, but then all our forms of learning in the ancient times, through itihasas, through aranyakas, through puranas, to the lay person, it may not make sense. It's a lot of myth, a lot of mumbo jumbo, but our whole sense of time as being cyclical and not linear, all of this needed to be taken together, which, sorry, I got digressed from the list that I was talking about, but then this understanding and underemphasis, since it's a long form, I'm also not under much pressure.
No, but
So that,
if I might see, because what you say that this concept of Mughal, you started by Aryans. The history taught Aryans were invader, Mughals were invader, Britishers were invaders. So
yeah,
that to a degree to Britishers it made sense because
yeah,
they were a tiny minority at any given time. Supposing what 1,000 Indians decided to get violent, it would have
yeah,
become very difficult for Britishers to survive on the roads. I'm just saying 1,000 Indians, maybe 2,000 Indians just became, let's say, what we have in today's world, where you don't care for your own life, your one culture is going on, blowing up things. If you became that mindset, Britishers were that tiny in absolute numbers, would be difficult for them to rule. So for them to say Islamic rule was good or glorify it makes sense. But for Congress, which came to power, to continue with that glorification, you
mm,
come to Delhi. I say Delhi is the capital of India. Anybody comes from all over the world, he comes to Delhi. A person comes from Karnataka to meet his member of parliament, goes to a Tughlaq road. Why should he go to a Tughlaq road and not to, let's say, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj road or a home dynasty road or
yeah,
any other road? So or Nanda road or Maurya road, any road for that matter. I'm neutral on that. So what do you think was the reason for Congress to continue with the narrative and not change names of person like even Aurangzeb, who in his own documents, in his own text, is saying this is my ideology and these are the mandirs I have destroyed and happily destroyed. So what do you think
yeah.
was happening in the mindset there?
That's very interesting because I mean, it's a conjecture. So I would put it on two aspects. One I'd already covered of in the sense of what Dr. Bhairappa had mentioned about how national unity needs to be maintained. So for that reason, you don't have to tell the complete truth. You need to whitewash the truth. You need to present a sanitized version of the truth. The other problem, I think, more deeper problem to my mind is probably the Nehruvian way of life. I mean, and his whole idea of what he saw as Indian civilization. Now, he was not a historian, he was not a researcher, but then he sat and wrote this beautiful prose, The Discovery of India. And I hope he discovered it at the end of it. But then it's, as I said, it's a wonderful writing. But based on this whole construct again, that at the cusp of freedom, and after freedom, we needed to break away from the past. There's almost this sense of shame, a sense of wanting to not have anything to do with the past. Thousands of millennia of our past needs to just be blackened, and let's move on with a new approach. And that new approach is national integration, unity, Ganga, Jamuni, Tehzeeb, and all of this, which can then create also a kind of have a parallel impact on politics, vote banks, and all of that could be nurtured. So in the process, so interestingly, the Congress never had these intellectuals, right? They outsourced that to the leftists to sit and hang on to their apron strings as the historians who would write this history in a new India, where the larger agenda was set and outsourced, saying you do the legwork, and very dutifully they were his master's voice, where these accomplishments of the past needed to be downplayed, and which to me is so strange. A new country which has been born after so much of a colonial struggle should actually exaggerate, in my view, some of the achievements of our past, and instead we did completely the opposite, just for these reasons. As I mentioned, it's a complete, I think, a Nehruvian mindset and fascination, where uh, being so abashed about your past, about your culture, about your traditions, and look at modernism as not as a continuum from the past, but as a rupture from it, and a complete rupture in a way that there is no identification at all. Which is why, I mean, a Somnath Mandir's re-establishment was not just a symbolic Hindu temple. I think it was a very important civilizational point that was being made, that we've actually broken free from all kinds of external aggressors, invasions, and so we are rebuilding that in a new India as a seat of our reaffirmation and a reassurance of ourselves as a nation. But But that too, how Nehru opposed that, and he didn't even want the then president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, to go and inaugurate the temple and so on. So this whole Hindu phobia, phobia, these terms are the flavor of the season. So the Hindu phobia that existed, and I think that translated in the way we saw, our past and wrote it. So and to that, I would also add, denial of continuity of the Indian civilization itself, the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain traditions, which there was a lot of, there were conflicts, but there were also a lot of give and take. So as I said, setting conflicts where none existed among these communities, which continues to be done to this day. And in all of this, the Hindu identity to be shown as irrational, superstitious, regressive, barbaric, mythical, and then you bring in caste, and then you had to play these things, and the fulcrum of the evil of all of this was on Brahminism. And so that was the big villain in the whole story, where someday everybody decided to sit in a room and we will oppress everybody else in this country. So I think that whole reductionist approach that I spoke about right at the beginning, that has been the bane of historiography.
Vikram, but the one interesting thing, and you have raised 3 points, whichever one of them you want to take, you can take up. One is that a national identity. There was a specific attempt made not to own up to your national identity. Thing which we were taught was unity and diversity. I have a fundamental problem with this term, because I think this diversity taken to an extreme led to an Article 370. Because you wanted to say everybody is so diverse, mollycoddle everybody, whereas you had to assimilate everybody. You had to find the common points. You have to build your history book that it's a continuous tradition rather than mollycoddling people, especially after 47 had already happened and you knew beyond a point you cannot mollycoddle, which is why I find it doubly surprising. See, these history books being the way they were, if there was no partition, I can to a degree understand that as a prime minister from, let's say, Northwest Frontier Province to Bangladesh, you are not wanting to change sensitive issues. Then in that mindset, one would understand it. In a mindset where you have already gone through a land loss of epic proportions, to then not change your history books is mind-boggling. And why is it in 6 years of this government still not changed? I want to hear your views on that. How much time is enough time?
I think if we've all spoken and tweeted and poured our angst about that, I think that if there's any biggest singular, disappointment that this government brings to the table, among many others, I think it is the fact that we have not even begun this whole process of a civilizational relook when it comes to matters of culture, when it comes to matters of education, history, and so on. And that doesn't seem to be priority at all. Of course, roti kapda makan, war at the borders, all of that is very important, national security, integrity. But then you can't keep these issues waiting till all of that is resolved, because if we lose our identity as a nation, then I don't know what else. We may become a $5 trillion economy eventually, but then unless your future generations don't have that sense of identity or pride in your own country, these cannot come just by installing mammoth statues and having these huge flags and all of that. There also needs to be that very fundamental shift that needs to happen, which I don't think there is that seriousness at all. We've had a former HRD minister very infamously quoting everywhere that we haven't changed a single word in the history textbooks, almost as a matter of pride, whereas it should be a matter of great shame. And I must again emphasize that, when we say rewriting history textbook and people make such a hullabaloo about it, there is nothing wrong about rewriting history. As I said, world over, and a subject like this, which is, as I said, an interim report, people will rewrite. The tale will always glorify the hunter, and it will be the handmaiden of the ruler. But then it has to be done, I think, not with mumbo jumbo, not with a set of quacks, which is usually what the response usually is, from the other side of the spectrum, which is so easy and open to derision. And you kind of put all kinds of people who don't have too much of scholastic and academic credentials in the whole task of writing history. By now, I wish at least there was an Indian Institute of Indology or Indic Studies, which was like a clearinghouse of all manuscripts, all inscriptions from across the nation. Because if you want to rewrite the history of India, you will have to look at texts in Sanskrit, you have to look at texts in Prakrit, Pali, Persian, Arabic, not rely only on some British English text, which is just 250 years. Our prism is so small to see. So imagine the mammoothness, the scale of this project. It's a national project which brings together scholars from all over the country who could actually translate these texts, epigraphists, because our history was not just in books, but also on the walls and inscriptions of temples, on coins. In all of this is where these clues lie. So someone needs to put this whole thing together, sieve it together, and then based on evidence, based on scientific and modern studies, where people cannot disparage it as mumbo jumbo, just as Al-Baruni or a colonial historian did, which is what I think even those attempts that governments of this flavor do, is just that you just have a bunch of nuts who will just put anything together. Just so depending on which party is in power in Rajasthan, Rana Pratap will either win or lose the Haldi Ghati battle, which is not how I think things should be, right? I mean, if the BJP
Vikram,
comes
but Vikram, there is one thing which riles me up, and it's not your argument, but something you said here. It riles me up when people say that border is a priority, economy is a priority. It is not a binary. Do you have a dearth of manpower? It's not as if a defense minister is working on defense, you can't have 3-4 people you like working on a parallel textbook. And textbook is not even cost-wise, costing-wise, it's not something which is going to cost you 1,000 crores. It probably won't even cost you 50 crores to set up a rundown government building, house the top 10 academicians in it, top 20 academicians with excellent researchers, and start working. Get off your, sorry for the language, get off your backside and start working. So this argument that economy ko dekhen, defense ko dekhen, we are talking not in money terms or deviation. I can understand if somebody says defense ko dekhen or economy ko dekhen and monuments na build karen. That is a question of money shifting. Where is the money shifting here? Zilch, zero, nada, nothing.
Right.
So why is this bogus argument put forth, and I'm sorry, by a lot of people who belong to the broader universe of the party in power, that this bumkum argument is put forward? Priority kya hai? Arey bhai, isme to kharcha hi nahi hai. They are volunteers. I presume you would be more than happy to write 2 chapters just with the acknowledgement without a paycheck of 1 crore rupees. So what is the problem? Why do you think this bumkum is given?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm speaking very emphatically, but I feel very emphatic on this.
I'm glad you did, and in fact, there's no disagreement. I in fact mirrored the same argument that this is how the government thinks, because or the people, either there is no awareness or there's no understanding of the importance of such deeply civilizational questions. It's a civilizational opportunity that we've got at this point in our nation's history, and if we let it pass, I don't know when this opportunity will come back again, because you're never given second and third chances in life ever. So if you're going to lose that and not have, as you said, it's a mammoth task, but it's not an undoable task. And in the 6 years, I would have hoped that even if textbooks had not yet been changed, at least the research material that is there, it's not just textbooks, it's also narratives that need to be created through readable books that people can write, and the entire caucus and the ecosystem that exists on the other side to even be able to challenge that in a way, in a confident and articulate manner. It's you need information, and you just can't go by mumbo jumbo, which is what happens. So that whole awareness is not there, the realization of the importance is not there. And I hope through all this battering that all of us keep giving on social media, someone somewhere opens their eyes, because it's already too late, and it'll probably become irrevocable. And it's not just, while it's as important, winning election after election is important, but then parties will come and individuals will come and go. But I think the civilization needs to stay on and remain, and for that these changes are very, very important and fundamental, which nobody seems to kind of realize or understand. Certainly not all the eminences who have been HRD ministers.
Vikram, you have done a lot of work and documented on Veer Savarkar. There were certain leaders, famously, I think if you're having a chai, who made comments on Chai Wala as well as Veer Savarkar, Mani Shankar here, right? So, how did you get interested in the subject? And I would recommend everybody, please go and read Vikram's book on Veer Savarkar. It is an amazing book. Part 1 is out, part 2 would be out soon, I hope. And Vikram, they made a strong attempt to paint Veer Savarkar as somebody who went and apologized to the Britishers, Veer Savarkar as somebody who was very casteist, which is, I think, quite opposite from the truth. But I would want you to speak on certain facts of, because when you try to, the motives of Congress have always been pick the 2-3 big figures, whether it was the Prime Minister, show him as per somebody who did riots, when it is not riots, actually a program, they wanted to make it or Veer Savarkar as somebody who apologized to British. But on Veer Savarkar, you've done a lot of work. So if you could speak about him a bit and this attempt to paint him in a particular light.
It's so shocking and so saddening as I continue my research, and there've been a lot of questions even on Twitter which asked you specifically, when is this volume 2 coming? I really wish it would have come out by the end of this year, but thanks to this lockdown, work like this requires a lot of legwork, travel, going to archives, boring activity which far away from the humdrum of the world. So that has been it's become a problem with this travel freeze and lockdown. So hopefully by before the middle of next year, I should be able to get this out. And I'm seeing through that, and tracing this back, Ishkaran, I bring your memory back to R.C. Majumdar, the famous historian, who was actually supposed to write a history of India's freedom struggle after independence. And he was very categoric in telling the government, I think it was in the 1960s or so, where he said, look, I'm not going to write a compliant kind of a narrative which you want to sell. And he had very, very strong views of the failures of Gandhi, the failure of the freedom struggle movement itself, and its whether it was really effective enough to actually get us our freedom. What were the causes? What were the actual reasons? Was it Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose? Was it the naval mutiny? Was it the armed conflict, which has started not just by Netaji, but right from 1857, the first war of independence, as Savarkar called it, right from there till 1946. So he wanted to bring these things out in a government publication brought out by the Ministry of Information Broadcasting or whatever, so publications division. So but then he was told that anything critical will not be accepted, and so he was shunted out of this committee. And so then you had this man, very curiously, you had this person called Tara Chand, who was actually he was a medieval history scholar. He had written books on Islam, on the history of Islam in India and things like that. He was an archaeologist, and later he was also made the ambassador of India to Iran. Now Tara Chand then is given this project to write the history of freedom struggle, who had nothing to do with modern Indian history. And this was a very, very eulogizing, version that the government released, I think 1967 by the publications division. And that has been the bedrock for the story that 3 generations have been drilled, that, we all had this non-violent movement which went on for decades and decades. And we very vociferously said, quit India. And the British generously said, okay, and then packed their bags and left. So, so in the process of my own research, I'm seeing so many characters, so many, men and women of that era, Vasudev Balwant Phadke, the Chafekar brothers, Shamji Krishna Verma, Madam Bhikaji Kama, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Sachindranath Sanyal, BBS Iyer, MPT Acharya, Lala Hardayal, the Gadar Party, Bhaga Jatin. You had Rash Bihari Bose, who did so much from Japan. All of these people you ask a 8th standard, 9th standard student, I don't think any of these names would even light a bulb in their heads, because we have not been told these stories at all. So with Savarkar too, the constant thing were a couple of things that, one is Mafinama, and that can keep going on ad infinitum. I can keep explaining it time and again that this was not, and as a lawyer, you know best that, and put all the petitions in the appendix to my book. These are a very normal legal instrument, which was available not just to him but to everyone else, including Ram Prasad Bismil and other people who also put petitions later. Sachindranath Sanyal put petitions and got out of jail. So, but then to posit the blame only on him as if he was the one who was the only one who was covering for mercy, that becomes a problem. And why does that happen? I mean, the manifestation of this thought process, I would say, goes to what the former leader of the Congress in the Lok Sabha said, Mallikarjun Kharge, where in an answer to the Prime Minister, he said, "Aapke kutton ne bhi Swatantrata Sangram mein bhag nahi liya tha." So we are the rightful heirs. We are the ones who have done all the hard work, all the hard lifting, and none of you from any other stream of thought have any role to play in this freedom struggle. So even today, to enjoy the spoils of power, we are the natural heirs and inheritors. So anyone who comes here is just a usurper who has just come for time pass for a few years, but then ultimately that is ours. It belongs to us because we naturally have worked so much to get this, and it belongs to us. So to do that, all these characters have to be defiled or forgotten. Some people you can't defile, say a Bhagat Singh or an Ambedkar or a Shama Prasad Mukherjee to some extent. These people you cannot defile. You can then forget. You can slowly erase their names or bring them to a footnote, a small paragraph. Year after year, their mentions in books would come increasingly less. Whereas some people, with Savarkar, the problem also becomes that he was also the founder of the whole, not founder, he's the one who popularized the whole concept of Hindutva. So then if you have an axe to grind with the BJP, then you will have to assail their ideological ancestor and say, oh, he was such a coward, he did this, he was a British collaborator, he was a casteist, whereas all that he did in the 13 years that he was in house arrest in Ratnagiri was social reforms of the kind that probably nobody had done then, and Ambedkar was also so laudatory.
Could you speak about some of the social reforms he did?
Yeah. So he writes this Hindutva treatise in 1923 in Ratnagiri, where he says all of us who belong to this landmass, who consider this as our holy land, not in terms of religion, but in terms of our allegiance to it, and also, in our land of our forefathers, Pitru Bhumi and Punya Bhumi, are Hindus in terms of not the theological meaning of the word, but culturally and nationalistically, we are Hindus. And so nothing should separate us, a Brahmin, a Nair, a tribal in Andaman or Jangama, a Sikh. We all have the same blood flowing through us. All of this was nice in theory. So that had to be put into practice. And so there he had these 7 shackles that he spoke of Hindu society, where Vedokta Bandi, where the Vedas are not the preserve of only one community, it is universal knowledge. So let's make it accessible to everyone. Let's not calumnize this knowledge that this country has produced only because you probably don't like a community which is associated with it now, or the language that is associated. So that's why he said, okay, the problem is the sacred thread which is preventing people from accessing the Vedas. Let's democratize it and put it to everybody. And so some may argue, but that's a very casteist thing. So you can do 2 things, right? Like a Periyar did, who went and cut off the Janeyus of all the upper castes in Tamil Nadu. Or you can give it to everyone and say all of you are now equal. So both, this is the more constructive approach, where you're democratizing it and making it accessible to everyone. Vyavasay Bandi, where you talk about all the professions are to be got only by merit and not by heredity. That doctor ka beta doctor, and today in all this nepotism talk, I think that becomes so relevant again. Roti Bandi, where intercaste dining. So someone who started the first intercaste cafe in Ratnagiri, where people of all castes could sit and eat. Now today today also it's so difficult, maybe in hinterland India, but at that time, where among the Brahmins of Maharashtra, Deshastha and Chitpavan were not allowed to sit together and eat or marry among themselves. This was a huge step forward, where people could actually sit together and eat. Associated with that was Beti Bandi, where intercaste marriage. Sparshabandi. He was someone who wanted a complete annihilation of untouchability and opening of temples to people of all communities. And so he supported Ambedkar's temple entry movements in different parts of Maharashtra, and also started the first ever temple in this country in 1931 called the Patit Pavan Mandir, where people of all communities could actually go, where a Mahar or a Bhangi would actually be the priest, and the Brahmin would actually go and touch his feet and take the prasad. So Sparshabandi, Shuddhi Bandi, where people, Hindus who were converted to other religions either through allurement or through force, there was no mechanism to bring them back into the Hindu fold. So the whole Shuddhi movement of the Arya Samaj, so that was given such a huge fillip by Savarkar in his life in Ratnagiri. And finally the Samudra Bandi, where the crossing the seas considered as a loss of caste. So that too, where he stressed upon go to the Shatru's camp, learn what they have to say, and then beat them in the game right there, which is exactly what he did while he was in London. So going to the Mahar Vadas, the Bhangi Vadas, and cleaning the streets there, getting them to intermix, and these things, he always mentioned, these things cannot happen through a top-down approach where someone talks you down to say that, but it has to be an emotional integration between people. So there was Asprishya Ganapati, which was celebrated in the Ganeshotsavas that Tilak had started, where the so-called untouchables would have their Ganapati, where again a Bhangi would be the priest and the Brahmin would be subservient. So these were very important works, which sadly all these so-called champions of social justice, they have simply forgotten, and worse is they call him Manuvadi and casteist, which could be the last thing that someone like a Savarkar was, and which is what is so sad. You do this gobblation propaganda, generation after generation, and a lie then sticks as truth, which is what is, I think, very, very terrible when it comes to him. So
on one of these aspects, conversion, Veer Savarkar did it in while he was in jail also, because there were a lot of I think separate kitchens there for Muslims versus Hindus. So on this, he was always very conscious of how to bring people back into the fold, and what I started with. We have to be very clear. Anything which promotes diversity beyond a point, we have to shun it. We have to say all who are born on this soil and others who have common ancestry. Because if we keep on going to this diversity part and probably bring this West concept of safe spaces and safe topics, we would never reach a solution. And a lot of what has happened in a textbook is the safe spaces. That no, we will not discuss history in its true parameters. We will not cover this about Aurangzeb, even though there are scrolls on that, even though there are farmans on that, even though there are administrative reports saying we did this, what you asked us to do. We will not cover it. So that's surprising.
In fact, if some of our NCERT textbook is probably read metaphorically by Aurangzeb or his court historian, they would be probably executed under an elephant's feet, because it shows him as a very benevolent person, which is totally against the whole theological demand of a ruler to establish the true faith through jihad.
What's your view on this? That people who were specifically targeting in history places of worship of Hindus, how should history books in our schools deal with them?
In what targeting, as in terms of the invasion,
destruction of Kashi, Kashi Vishwanath, Somnath Mandir, etc., etc. How do you think that aspect should be covered? Do you think that aspect is best left out as a safe space, which is what our history books have done up till now in school? How do you see, how should it be covered?
So ironically, we are discussing this at a time when world over we have a hashtag campaign saying Black Lives Matter, right? Where oppression is not going to be taken lying down, and rightly so. We have statues of Columbus or even Winston Churchill being brought down across the world. And here, alternatively, we are while we support that hashtag, we probably advocate something totally different. Where, as I said earlier, narrate the tales of history, the wounds of history as they are, and in because just because as the BJP government here would want to erase the subject on Tipu Sultan, you can't wish away your past because you don't like a person, or you can't wish it away because you want to build something else. So if Aurangzeb or Ghazni or anybody demolished these places of worship, it's a matter on record, it's a matter of fact. So these have to be mentioned, but at the same time, I think the emphasis needs to be the fact that for today's children, maybe even from the communities which these politicians think will get, they will get offended. They need to be told that these are not your heroes, these are not your icons, and it's and the guilt or the blame of that does not lie on your shoulders. You need to learn from that past, that mistake of the past, of how your ancestors only were treated by these invaders. Of course, it's a change of heart in terms of faith, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one condones all these oppressions and the aggression that has been done on us civilizationally. And Naipaul called us a wounded civilization, not without reason.
Viral, you have asked a question: will the new education policy collect our history books? Let's have a new education policy which we all can see and give comments on before we speak. 6 years, we are still, I think, waiting and wishing for it.
Interestingly, I was actually so there is a report, Ishkaran, which I think was created. In fact, I've contributed a chapter to it, which spoke about the role and importance of the arts in our education system and how culture is so important. So this, I think, was given to the government 2 years ago, and we don't know which Babu is sitting pickling that forever. So these things will never gather momentum unless there is a very strong, I think, political will. So someone at the helm needs to give that push, saying, enough is enough, and we need to get this going, because everything cannot be in your last conversation with Anand Ranganathan, where he spoke about social media and its role in correcting historical wrongs. I would mirror what he said then, which went highly viral, about handles like True Indology and others who are doing. A friend of mine here in Bangalore called Abhas, who debunks a lot of these myths, which is important because this narrative war happens at multiple levels. But just to be satisfied only with that, and in fact, True Indology, in several DMs personally, I've said, please, all the knowledge that you have, don't restrict it to these 140 characters. Please start publishing books. And if you need any help in terms of finding a publisher or getting it, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you out with that. Because tweets will go to tomorrow. Now there are fleets. So, tomorrow what we speak today will not last. Whereas a book creates a narrative which is going to last beyond the life of the writer. So today, it's not with any sense of vanity, but then if a leftist historian needs to demolish my book on Savarkar, which has about 150 pages of bibliography and endnotes, they'll have to do double the amount of hard work to be able to do that. And his research is not everyone's cup of tea. You really have to put in a lot of effort. So rubbishing it away on personal grouses can be done, but actual scholastic or academic rubbishing, for that you need to put that challenge on these narratives, saying we are very much worthy of scholarly work. We are the inheritors of the scholarly traditions of India. So what are we to be angry about?
That's a question for you, Vikram, if you can read it from Anshurat Sharma. What are the challenges that people like Vikram, or True Indology is different, I think they want to be anonymous, though I have also chatted with them, face in formally entering academia and becoming a professor in JNU? I don't know whether you want to be a professor in JNU, but the larger question of how the gatekeepers stop. Yeah. So how much is it still happening, this gatekeepers stopping to your friends or people who want to become professors or entering to academia in India?
I think it's going on even as we speak. There's been absolutely no change on that front. And this dog in the manger thing, the complete lack of professional ethics, where careers have been destroyed of people who held a differing viewpoint, because a lot of academic work rests on fellowships, on things like this, which people earn on basis of their merit and not necessarily only on the basis of their political orientations, which is what has happened in India, where people who held differing viewpoints have just been shunted out and their careers have been ruined. Unfortunately, and then the same group also mock, saying, where are the right-wing intellectuals? Naturally, where will they be? Even if they are, they'll be unknown to you. And even if they are not, then you have not created that space to foster them. And this is not only, Ishkaran, only in India. If you read that article of Nicholas Kristof, I think in the New York Times some time ago, where he spoke about how worldwide the so-called liberals have actually stifled dissent, especially when it came to academics, the media, the arts, all fields of culture, and particularly in academia. He says even in the US, a Republican or a conservative view probably constitutes 2-3% of the academic corpus in history, social sciences.
Vikram, a very interesting research was showing till 70s or 80s, Republicans or conservatives, for that matter, in US academia were 35 to 40% your voting preferences. Today, they say across the board, especially in Ivy Leagues, it's 95% people who are voting liberals or Democrats. That's not a percentage. That's a monopoly. Monopoly on thought. It's a monopoly on thought. And that is why we have started this zone of safe spaces. One of the things, again, which is my pet peeve, and I hope it doesn't come to India, though I am sure as our stupid ability of our elite to copy West, we will have these safe spaces in Indian universities. If we don't already have, I'm actually out of academics, where university becomes a cocoon where you are told, don't say this word, don't say that word. If you say this, you will hurt somebody's feeling. You are 20 plus years in age on average. Sometimes you're 30 plus there because you go late to study. And what is this utter nonsense of opinions harming you and you need to be saved from opinions, which is going on? So how do you react on this concept of safe spaces? Needed, not needed? And in there, it has become a dogma now. You have to have safe spaces, not offend anybody by anything you say.
And that's the biggest travesty with knowledge and truth, because whatever happened recently, of course, later I think he was allowed to make that talk or whatever. General J.D. Bakshi, who was invited to JNU to talk on the Saraswati civilization. Now, you may have multiple opinions on it. I mean, you may think it's bunkum or whatever, but then hear the person out. Someone's brought out a book. Someone's done several years of research. So and then who's talking of intolerance here? So, if you are not tolerant to another viewpoint, where if the other person's views are so flimsy, then it'll be so easy for you to intellectually counter that, rather than go on a goonish kind of a rampage, which is what happens, where universities, which are supposed to be spaces which foster this sense of dissent, differing viewpoints, become again these safe spaces where only my way or the highway, where either we will not discuss uncomfortable topics, or we will discuss only those topics which majority of us believe in and are interested in. And the same university can invite all kinds of characters who are shouting slogans for the dismemberment of the country. That is tolerance. That is
JNU. Bharat tere tukde honge, Bharat tere tukde honge, down with the Indian army and God knows what else. That is not offensive.
That is not offensive, but some general whom you may think he's a loony. I mean, for all you care, it's okay. That's your opinion. Someone else thinks he's a very eminent scholar too after retiring from the army. So listen to him, read his work, give him that space to put his viewpoint, and demolish him if you find his work to be stupid. But that's what, as I said earlier, to demolish someone's work, you need to do double the amount of work. And that hard work, no one is, all these armchair, activists are unwilling to do. And if anything, I think the left, to a large extent, has started to come to celebrate mediocrity and ignorance. And they do it with such aplomb and with such high-sounding words that it starts to sound very intellectual. But actually, in reality, being totally closed to any sort of differing opinion, I think that is the biggest bane.
Which is very surprising, because in our cultural ethos, in our gurukuls, the method of learning was questioning, where you had discussions. long discussion going on for days on concepts of life and every other thing. And now to not invite, and see, Major General G.D. Bakshi is a very peculiar case because he's a Major General. So it's not somebody, even though I don't like to say that, but he is somebody who's achieved a certain level of seriousness. He was defending you, right?
Yeah.
And at a very high rank, he was defending you. It's not a low rank that he was defending you. And now you don't allow him to come into a university funded by taxpayers. And if it was a different government, a different vice chancellor, probably he wouldn't have come.
Yeah.
So there, yes, there is certain point in having a favorable government, no matter how slow or how lazy they are. At least some things, just because of appearances, they have to let you do in universities.
Yeah, true. And at least there was so much of so many people expressed also this surprise that how did you manage to find a mainstream publisher for your book on Savarkar? Because I mean, even that is such a attitudinal change, I would say, in the country. And so while we rubbish away the government and its actual direct initiatives, I think the environment that it has fostered, where at least these other voices get to be heard. Now, I must tell you that after the book came out, almost all the several of the mainstream media, print media in particular, with a leftist orientation, refused to even feature or review the book. The book, there were bookstores across the country which refused to stock the book. And it's not that this was my first book. I have 3 books already to my credit, and so many of them also told the distributors that, look, we like the author, we have nothing to do again with him, but then we have a problem stocking a book on Savarkar in our bookshelves, because that would pollute our stores.
Somebody just commenting, Vikram, that I was reading your book in office. A few people got so angry that they stopped talking to me and called me Sangi.
There you go. Bolsters my view. So that is the whole thing that we're talking about. And these are the same flag bearers of India has become intolerant, not in my name, and all these other catchy slogans. So as I said, this mediocrity, this ignorance, this arrogance, all camouflaged with such high-sounding words in to flabbergast people, and that's exactly what is done. So, but despite all this, censorship, Ishkaran, I think, which is where the social media, the positive impact of that, within 6 hours of the book, going online on Amazon, it had already, gone up to the bestseller charts, and it ruled the number 1 bestseller list for almost several months, including as recently as last month. So you can do what you want. I mean, who cares for your reviews? Who cares for what you say? And there were reviews which were also planted to kind of deride the book. Its methodology is this and that by people who have no great credentials in history themselves. All of this was done so that it creates an ill will about the book. But it doesn't matter as long as there are people you are able to reach out through these new mediums that have come to our liking. With all these people are redundant, and that loss of power, I think, is what riles them the most.
Before I come to this loss of power, you said something, I wanted to elaborate on that. So when you submitted your book for publishing, or maybe you had a publisher before you started to write, was this question asked that are you writing, because your book is broadly, in fact entirely, showing Veer Savarkar in a light which is positive. So did you have people telling that are you writing a pro book or a anti book? Were those sort of questions put to you before they made a publishing decision, that do we publish it or not? How was that experience when you were talking to publishers?
Yeah, I think truth be told, and all credit to them, I don't know what behind closed doors what discussions happened in my publisher's office, but at least with me there was never this demand that was made that what is going to be the tone of your narrative. Probably because, as I said, it had been 10 years of being in the literary field myself, and I'd won awards and this and that. So maybe it was easier that way, where they couldn't question my credentials so easily. But for someone who's a first-time author, it may become quite difficult to actually break that wall and actually get published. Whereas for someone who's peddling a different kind of a viewpoint, it's ever so easy to not only get published, but thereafter win accolades and awards, across, largely outside India, right? I mean, in South India, you have these days even classical musicians who masquerade as sociologists and historians and write books on caste and bring caste even into music, and then deride that, and then lo and presto, you get a Maxese award, you get all kinds of things the next day. So, and probably later on, once if and when the dispensation changes, you'll get Rajya Sabha tickets, you'll get Padma awards, you'll get all kinds of things. So that ecosystem loves how to nurture their foot soldiers, and that is exactly how they've built this up for so many decades.
Well, they go into the caste composition of the brave army officers who got Veer Gati also. Very famously, they did a caste study of people who were martyred, got Veer Gati. But one thing I want to raise here is I was having a conversation with Rahul Roshan of India a few years ago. He had a very interesting point when you're talking about ecosystems award outside. So we had a conversation on nationalistic ecosystem. He says we have to understand one thing, that Congress is basically a byproduct of British ecosystem. See the founder, see the people who studied in British universities, shaped with British way of life, or who practiced in British courts. And let me tell you something, courts even today have a very rigid interpretation. It's still a closed environment. Unlike a lot of industries, courts are a very, very closed environment even today. It's not a very open environment in the sense of the hegemony or monopoly. So, and that time was probably way worse. So this ecosystem where Congress is basically a byproduct of British Raj, do you think that the current governments are doing enough to build an ecosystem? Because ecosystem in the end comes from power or money. Like it or not, this you need massive amounts of access to power and money to build an ecosystem. Otherwise, you are all lone warriors doing your lone things. Do you think enough is being done on building an ecosystem?
Is that even a question that needs an answer? So I think
your perspective, maybe you feel, because I get very often from my viewers that ecosystem kaise banega, and I keep telling them that we have to fight alone, because even Maharana Pratap could fight alone, and history remembers him greatly. But ecosystems do not get built without big business or power stepping in. Let's leave government aside. Abroad, you would have a huge ecosystem pumping money into gun rights, which is a conservative issue. Or whether you agree or not with abortion, conservatives will pump in a lot of money into anti-abortion movements. In India, do you see that happening for publishing books or building awareness, industrial or governmental support? How do you see that happening and playing out in India?
What I always feel quite upset about, and being quite unabashedly right of center in my views, is that the lack of unity when it comes to which is a good and bad thing, Ishkaran. Actually, I mean, we wouldn't want to become a clone of what the so-called other side is, where there's such bonhomie, there's such camaraderie. It's all like an old boys club where the media, the academia, the judiciary, the government, they're all backslapping each other, and the arts. So you're all, and foreign agencies, awards, literature festivals, all of these operating in such a lovely in cahoots with each other, where I favor you, you favor me. I will organize a literature festival where I will call this kind of writers only and censor these types. Then in return, you give me this award. So this kind of sharing the spoils that happens, one need not mirror that per se, but then the amount of wars and open brawls that happen among people on this side of the spectrum, with absolute no sense or strategy of a long-term vision as to what is it that you would like to achieve for, as a forget individuals, personalities. I think this whole idea that if someone among us comes up, then our importance will go down, so we need to pull that person down. I think this happens quite a lot on this side, which is why concerted attempts would hardly be there. And so that whole the whole strategy or vision as to what is it, so in the next 10 years, forget which government or party or leader is the prime minister or whatever, because India and Indian civilization is not going to go away if someone leaves the chair. So if there is a certain ideological bent of mind in the next 10 to 15 years, other than of course the big ticket things, Ram Mandir and uniform civil code, and I mean on more tactical issues, how is a counter response to be done? What is our unique strengths that we need to? Everything need not be reactive. Some could be a proactive strategy also that one could come about. I don't think that sort of manthan or even thinking happens, because everybody is insecure of everybody else. So think tanks which are there, how there is so much of wars going on between them. We will not let someone from this think tank come to our think tanks. This thing, if you are associated with the head of that think tank, then you are an enemy for us. So all with this kind of typical, I mean, that is a typical. Again, going back to history, we don't learn that these were the exact reasons of disunity among our Indian rajas and kings, which is what caused the downfall of this country, and we continue with that even today.
Vikram, what do you say? I was having a conversation on my YouTube channel, and people can check it out. Very interesting video with Amish Tripathi. So he's in London these days. So he's about to launch a new book. He just told me yesterday. So I was having a conversation. He said something very similar to what you said, that if we become what we are fighting for 1,000 years, then we would have lost the battle. Whereas there is another school of thought which comes and says that if we do not mirror the unity, there is a broader ideological unity, personal egos aside, where they build a moral pressure. Supposing a left-wing guy was to tweet something, they would bring unbelievable pressure on him or her that, oh, you too, tu to mat kar kam se kam. We have seen that playing out. Whereas there is no such moral pressure in the nationalist ecosystem that, Vikram, how could you do this? Or if you took a view which was, let's say, slightly left-leaning, nobody will hound you to death that why did you take this view on minor things. But there, that moral pressure group is there. So do you think that is a big lack, that we don't have a moral pressure group like that, which is, or you think that is the strength, that nobody, that we have 1,000 voices? So how do you see that?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't want to become, sheep who all follow the same viewpoint. There could be differing viewpoints, and I've stressed that through our entire thing, right from the first statement, that right from history to everything, there needs to be differing viewpoints and dissent, which is what is the bedrock of democracy. But then, as you said, there needs to be that larger strategic vision of an ideological future as to what are the things that people need to work on and how the various players, various wings of society, be it media, be it literatures, be it cultural ambassadors, all of these people, how there needs to be some broad things on which people need to agree upon, and individual issues and so on day-to-day basis. You and I also put out tweets in condemning the present government or whatever. That is still okay. That we need not have to be such sheep that everybody goes through the same thing. But yeah, it's good to have 1,000 voices. But then a broader unanimity, kind of coming together on some issues. I think that is very important, and that churn really needs to happen soon.
Something on a broader perspective, you said an ideological goal, or people need to understand systems. What is your view? Because this is something which I often ask. That was 2014. 2014 was a mixture of factors, let's say anti-incumbency and a charisma of a very strong opposition leader. 2019 was a victory. But are these victories, in your experience, a victory of a very charismatic leader? Or do you think there is a structural, fundamental change which has happened in the discourse and in the minds of we, the people of India? How do you see it? A cyclic change led by a charismatic leader? or a fundamental structural change like US, where whether you are Donald Trump, who frankly we saw can't quote a verse from Bible, becomes a Christian candidate, and even a Barack Obama has to say, I'm a Christian candidate. So both sides are very clear. We are Christian candidates. We are more Christian than you. We are fighting on Christian values and family values, blah, blah, blah. Whatever be the personal lives. But the public space is that. In India, that was not so. So do you think that structural change has happened, that anybody who comes now would necessarily have to be a Hindu nationalist leader? Or do you think this was just a change of voter mindset, anti-incumbency mixed with a charismatic leader? Structural or cyclic, broadly, I want your views on that.
Yeah. Hey, but we are quite digressing from the topic of our chat, but nonetheless, it's okay. History has become history in this conversation. We've come to modern day ecosystem and politics and all of that.
That's the problem with free flowing also, because what you say, I ask, it keeps on then going. We will come back to history after you say this. So
yeah. So no, I think it's a combination of both. I think that awareness and consciousness has come about in people, where now it's not very passe to say whatever you needed to say earlier. And in popular media, whether it's in cinema and so on, while of course the mode of reaction may not always be sophisticated, it could be violent and all of that, but see the cinema of the 70s and 80s and so on, where always the villain is this crooked Hindu priest. The good character is always some Christian father or a Maulvi or whatever, but then the Hindu priest is always shown as this conniving person who's only wanting to make money. So this from popular media to literature to even the political discourse, it was easy to dumb down and deride a community, whereas now it's the other way around, where there's competitive politics, where people become Janeudhari Brahmins only for a particular election. They run on temple tours. Why have the brother and sister not gone on temple tours at all these days? I fail to understand, right? Because if that was such a deep astha, then it can't just come out of your closet like Barsati Mendak do. So it has to be a continuing, even an Aam Aadmi party and Kejriwal's party talking about Sundarkand and all of that being recited. So I think it's competitive Hindutva where shades there also. So BJP is shown as this hardcore Hindutva, so we will do soft core and all of this. So if you create a constituency, politicians are finally vote harvesters, so they will come looking for whatever, So the whole Ambedkar Savarkar thing too. So today you cannot, deride Ambedkar because there is a political constituency. I had put out tweets earlier last week or so, where I just quoted, some of his quotes in 1940-45 book on partition and the thoughts on Pakistan, where, his views on what Islam is. Islam is a closed corporation which doesn't, which is not, commensurate with the concept of a modern nation state. An Indian Muslim can never be patriotic to his country because his allegiance is to a larger ummah or brotherhood, something to this effect, not the exact word, but something to this effect, which there. I put those out. Now, will anyone today, all these Jai Bhim and Mayawati and all of those who invoke his name, would they quote these verses from Ambedkar in an election rally and call him an Islamophobe and burn down the book or the writing? You can't, because there is a political constituency for that. Whereas Savarkar can be called, his writings in comparison would pale if by this modern construct of Islamophobia to Ambedkar's writings. But him you can deride, him you can criticize, because there's no claimants. Even the Hindu right wing doesn't claim him, because there's a lot of things that he said which is very uncomfortable for them to take, on cow worship, on caste, on so many things, which orthodox, Sanatanis even then and probably even now would be uncomfortable with. So unless you create a political constituency for something, I think one particular leader or a charismatic leader can work only for that many number of times. But then eventually that change of mindset, when it comes, then all the political players would probably wear down to chasing the same constituents.
Vikram, because you talked about Dr. Ambedkar, and he is a person of unique historical and current significance. As I said, I started by saying that in India, history is not really history. We don't see history as history because it is affecting current vote bank politics, and in a very decisive way, it's affecting current vote bank politics. But I can understand in history, you not being allowed to have a very off the norm analysis or opinion. But here we are whitewashing actual text of authors. From Aurangzeb to Dr. Ambedkar, we are whitewashing text for various reasons. How do you deal with this whitewashing of textbooks, and how can one get out of it?
Whitewashing and also forgetting. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Ishkaran, about this whole narrative of us as a nation of losers. Now, how many of us know about, say, a Lalitaditya Muktapida, the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir, who was mentioned by none less than Kalhana in his Rajatarangini as the world conqueror, and he had an empire that went across till almost the Central Asia. And then you had the Cholas, the Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, who came up to the Indo-Gangetic plains and then also took large parts of Southeast Asia under their command. And now Tamil is still a language in many of those countries even to this day. The kind of civilizational impact that this created of India in other countries. A Martanda Varma, in this obscure king in Kerala, Travancore. Do we know that this was the last ever war that any Asian power actually won, where he actually gave such a death blow to the Dutch East India Company in this battle called the Battle of Kolachal? I think I'm very bad with dates as a historian, 1730 something, Battle of Kolachal, where the Dutch were given such a death blow that globally they collapsed, not only in India. So this one little king should have been, you talked about celebrating historical characters. Martanda Varma should have been our source of strength, our source of inspiration. In my own state, you had this lady, Rani Abbakka Chautha from the Tulu, group in coastal Karnataka, who defeated the Portuguese. And the Portuguese were pushed forward, and that's when they went towards Goa and occupied Gomantak. So these names, Lasit Borpukon in Assam, the general of the Ahom dynasty, which ruled Assam for 600 years. The Ahom dynasty doesn't even feature in our history textbooks even once. Nobody knows even one king's name from the Ahom dynasty or from the royal family of Manipur or Tripura. The Northeast just doesn't feature, whereas all our history narrative as taught to us is a litany of dynasties that ruled Delhi, and the Delhi centricity of our history. I think it's time that India snatches her story back from this thraldom of Delhi. Delhi is not India, and India is a long, much bigger than the confines of that place. Suhail Dev Pasi, who's interestingly a very famous, caste leader in different parts of Uttar Pradesh, but then not someone who actually defeated the Ghaznavi forces so badly that it took Ghori so many more years to come back and attack India. You had Raja Dahir in Sindh, who of course got defeated to the Muhammad bin Qasim's assaults, but then he also put up a struggle which is probably a eulogy to the bravery of the Sindhis. Now, all these stories need to be compiled, and and I'm not talking about this only with that sense of chauvinism, Ishkaran, because there is that very thin line where, as I said earlier, revivalist history, where chest thumping, jingoism, we were the greatest, we created a nuclear bomb in the Mahabharata times. We don't need to get there because that's the perverse opposite of whatever is happening. But then actual stories of inspiring stories, these need to form. Now, if Chodo textbook, let these people take their own time to do whatever, but I think in popular parlance, through popular history, through popular media, now with social media, through web series, through films, through whatever else, if stories like these which are more inspiring, I think these come out. You spoke about Amish. I think what Amish and writers like him have done is to give that new flavor to what is called Indian mythology and derided that they were myths. But then these have become popular, where it's cool, so to say, for a young person to be seen reading Amish's book in a airport lounge. That same coolness quotient to Indian history needs to come, and so it needs to be written, and that happens only through individual efforts. Me and maybe several others who need to start working on that. I've started. I'm sure there are lots of others also who would want, because there are so many stories, so many interesting characters, intrigues, romance, wars. We're a land of storytellers. All of this needs to come out.
Who are, Vikram, which are the broadly, because a lot of people are asking, which are the broadly the dynasties you would wish people covered more and which have not been covered in our common narrative and parallels? You named a few of them, but as per you, which if somebody were to write book or read, because people are asking, we want to read, which were the 3-4 dynasties or periods you would want people to read about, to know the true history and to take pride that we won and we conquered? So which are the broadly 3-4 you would want them to read on?
It's quite difficult, no? I mean, I mentioned some of these names, but then including the Vijayanagar Empire. We would call Akbar the Great and Ashoka the Great, but it's never Krishnadevaraya the Great. Where even visitors from foreign countries who came there were talking about how diamonds were being sold on the streets of Hampi. Now the NCERT textbook of class 7 or 8 doesn't even mention Hampi, or there's just a little paragraph about Vijayanagar, and even there the belittling, where the Battle of Talikota of 1565, where Vijayanagar collapsed, or the collapse began because of the Bahmani invasions. That also is shown as it's not the invasion that was a problem, but it was an internal conflict. There was lots of, which it certainly was, but then the main push to the push coming to the shove was the way the Bahmani sultans came and invaded Hampi. And these are living monuments. These are UNESCO protected monument. Anyone goes to Hampi today. So if you take a young child who has read history textbooks and who goes there and sees that famous Narasimha statue in Hampi with all its hands broken, its mouth defaced, what is that child going to ask? I mean, in my history textbook I read something else, but here the proof is there staring at my face. Somebody did come and break this this monument. Who did that? If they ask their parents, what answer is the parent going to give? Because you want safe space, you want national unity, so you would not want to tell that truth to them, and therefore deny this whole thing ever happened. So I think Vijayanagar Empire is one, the Ahom dynasty is one, and I really feel that the Cholas and the Chola empire and what they did for cultural and political expansion, and these tales of bravery, not again, as I repeatedly say, as chauvinism and jingoism, but as true tales of valor. Because if we need to connect those dots, and like I said right at the beginning, that we have survived as a civilization, these were the tales which got us where we are. Some Velu Nachiyar in Tamil Nadu, who was probably the first woman who fought against British imperialism there. These people, these heroes need to be celebrated by us, right? I mean, whereas all we do, whether it is with the freedom struggle, whether it's the story before, is just to window dress and give space for a narrative that is convenient to our political views, and which is the saddest part.
Do you think that this glory period, like you said, Vijayanagara Empire is covered, but covered as it is coming to an end? All empires come to an end. That is a reality of life. But do you think that these glory periods of the empire need more covering from NCERT or school textbooks? Or do you think there has been sadly a lack of, I'm sorry to say, your community, the author community, who have not covered it in enough detail at individual level? Because see, if you make a movie on Tanaji, people make it a blockbuster. If you make a movie on Bahubali, which is was objected to as very Hindutva movie, it becomes a blockbuster. So do you feel somewhere there has not been enough non-fiction writing on these aspects. And that is a thing which people who have the ability to write, and I think it's a golden ability to write, who Saraswati Mata has been kind enough can express their thoughts on paper, have somehow not covered enough of this, because at individual level, or when you talk to your fellow authors, why have they not covered it enough in a language which is simplistic or innovative?
I think the answers are multiple, because I don't think nobody has done anything. Many must have done, but then like we alluded to earlier, to even get that published was so difficult, because it was a glass wall you couldn't manage to scale. I mean, again, coming back to nepotism in all these entertainment industry that we talk about today, so you would only promote the a particular view or a particular kind of people whose books you publish, popularize, and also take to different places through your literature festivals and all of that. So what is the incentive for a writer? What is the incentive for a writer to actually sit and I have this peeve even on Twitter so many times, and the fun part is tagging me. They would actually say, "Oh, do you have the PDF of the book?" And then someone else would say, "Yeah, I'll send it. What is DM me your email ID?" And then someone is also saying that this it's so costly. So can you please reduce the price? I mean, I don't sit and determine the price. It's a function of the publishers, the amount of effort that's been put into printing, and 600, 700 rupees we are unable to shell down. The same thing we'll spend at a McDonald's or a Pizza Hut, or even at a multiplex to buy a ticket. Whereas the same amount of money we would not want to shell on a book, which would actually last beyond your pizza, right? It will last for generations. Your children, grandchildren will also read that book, but we would not want to invest in that. So incentives that come from the publisher, the reader, all of it becomes it's a self-defeating task unless you're really, really charged up, or you have some pushtani jaidad on which you can live on. Seldom can people make a livelihood, unlike some idiots like me who manage to somehow if you don't have a full-time job per se or a career, and you actually are a full-time historian, a full-time researcher and writer. So it's a combination of all of those factors. But now I do see winds of change. I do see people, there is this hunger that's been created, and that I think joins very nicely to what you asked earlier. Is there been, forget these parties, forget these leaders, that fundamental change in psyche where people are pushing back, and eminent historians, when they quote some 1930 colonial person who compared Gujarat and Bengal, they get pushbacks from somebody who's and not, as I said, not everything is sophisticated and academic. Some is crude, but a lot of it is pushback. People are not willing to listen to any kind of nonsense you spout, like you probably did 20 years back, and that is what bothers and scares people. That how can there be so much intolerance where everybody is questioning us, where we had the singular hegemony and monopoly over what knowledge is, what truth is, and we are the custodians and the gatekeepers. We will not even allow anyone who doesn't agree with us into the fold.
Vikram, you raise a very valid point, and this is all the audience who are watching it. You have to consider this yourself. If you buy a Dr. Vikram Sampath book, or not buy it, download it for free or by cheap or whatever are the multifold views, please understand you have to support people who are doing work which you like. If you think it's worth reading because you want to read Veer Savarkar in a manner in which he should be written, then please put your wallet where your mouth is. This hogwash fed to you by communists or liberals that poverty is somehow to be glorified and all nationalists should die in poverty is absolute bumkum, because they definitely are not dying in poverty. They may wear very simple clothes, but you see the houses they live in, the localities they have their houses in, the sort of hotels they stay in. You have to support people whom you like. If you do not, then, because I asked him a question that why aren't enough people covering Chola dynasty? Why aren't enough people covering Ahom dynasty? Even though revolution is coming, but when it comes, when people write, if you like them, at that time, please do not be for lack of a better word, be somebody who does not acknowledge the copyright or the hard work. Vikram, how much time does it take you to cover a book? Just asking you generally. There can be no
3 to
fixed
4
answer.
years. 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
So any author you like, it could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but it is an years of work. So if you download it for free, know in your heart you are doing theft. Please don't do that to whatever author you like, to whatever creator you like. Don't do that. You also have to contribute into building it. But we can just change. That's a very good point you said. This change in the mindset of knowing the history. Do you see in your circles people writing more on it? Because I don't know offhand any new book on any of these dynasties that you have spoken on, which has gone into it. So I don't know any of it. Is there something?
Sure. No, unfortunately, no, because that's again, it's a laborious process, Ishkaran, and so if I'm talking of 2 or 3 years of if you actually want to work hard, of course you can churn out books once in 6 months and so on. That's also fine. These are pop books that come out, but then if actual work needs to be put, just consider where will this writer or researcher, what would sustain that person. So when we talk of ecosystem and businesses and all this, we've not even created, on the other side you have foundations which give out scholarships, with a hefty amount of money every month, just so that the person sits and does research. So there are gatekeepers there, who the head of the foundation, to whom you send the proposal, they will vet it. If it complies with your ideological bent and the kind of agenda you want to further, then that person is given this fellowship and stipend. And also it's just see how it operates. So first of all, your research is facilitated. You don't have to work for those 1.5 years, 2 years, the time of the fellowship. And in that time, you can do everything. There'll be a lot of help available. There'll be money. There's everything. And once it is the work is done, the group ensures that it also gets published, because again, the publishers and the people are in cahoots. Once the book gets published, they also ensure it is popularized, because literature festivals are on your side. So the multiplicative effect of that, and so then you overnight someone becomes very famous. So because everybody and all of them backslap each other, they give blurbs which support, this is the best work that has ever been written. So even if it is mediocre, or even if it is not high on research, that whole backslapping, that lovely camaraderie, and then you have the pliant media which will review nicely, which will feature you. So it's so easy to then become overnight famous, whereas the amount of work you may have put in might be less or more. I mean, irrespective. But then the incentives, the opportunities, that creation, and like you mentioned earlier, this is not some huge multi-crore project. This is just some amount of money. Even that amount, if corporate houses or so on, which claim to be on a right of center kind of an ideology or conservative ideology, they don't seem to invest. So can't blame only the government, because even people, the moneyed classes on this side, they don't see any need or importance for such things. The civilizational importance of forget beating some leftist black and blue. It's, I think, a national duty, a national responsibility that you're keeping for 100 generations from today. That also is not thought of as important, which is not a huge amount of money. Then that I don't know, unless these are some ekla chalore here and there who's doing some work, it would just get drowned in oblivion. Because I can spend 4 years, 5 years now since I've been obsessed with Savarkar, and get this. So okay, Savarkar is exorcised. What about Madam Bhikaji Kama? What about someone else? So there's a host of people waiting to be told. So there have to be like 10,000 Vikrams who will sit and write 10,000 other books and stories which change the narrative. And only when that happens, when that facilitating environment is there, can that actually any change really come about.
You're very right, because just today somebody sent me, in fact, Swamy Vikram of World Hindu Congress and World Hindu Forum, he sent me, and I tweeted that the great now freedom fighter Bipin Chandra Pal in 1913 writing that our biggest challenge, that time China is also under a colonial rule. He said our biggest challenge would be China. ये Britishers हैं, ये चले जाएंगे, ये हमें जरूरत रखेंगे. To imagine in 1930, when independence is far off, didn't happen in his lifetime, when China's independence didn't happen in his lifetime, for him to put these thoughts in a book in 1913 saying challenge will be, he said two things, this pan-Islamization and China would be the challenge for our civilization. That's astounding when I read it, right? To predict future events, 62 happened, and understand we are both under colonial rule at that time. But we will not have any research or any well thought out books on these freedom fighter struggles also, except the Nehru dynasty, where you might have 500 books written, including promoted by them. How far do you think this is that using social media in a low cost manner, do you think history can be written, or do you think it will have to be a serious book form? By that I mean these videos. See, do you think that okay, let's take your example. Do you think, does it work? Would it work if you could do a YouTube channel with few authors and do a session on one dynasty one day, do you think those sort of mediums can work, or do you think it needs bibliography, research to be taken seriously?
It's a it's not a binary, it's not an either or. I think it's both, because you need to reach out. So through these, a lot of youngsters who would probably be hooked onto this get interested, and then you slowly, get them into reading actual books. Everybody, if you directly give a 600-page book, they may not be interested, and it's not imperative that everybody needs to know about the Cholas or whatever. So even if in a concise form, in a detailed version, everyone need not know, but in a concise form, in a snippet kind of a thing which talks about this, so that is certainly a great way to start. And then those who, it's like a filtrate where, and as more and more people get interested, they can go deeper into one particular some particular incident, or a king or a queen or whatever may interest someone, or a character, and they would want to go deeper and read more about that, for which there needs to be material. Now, including on Savarkar, the last book in English, proper comprehensive biography was written on him in the 1960s, when he was still alive, by this man called Dhananjay Keer. Now, after that, 1960 to 2019, how many biographies of Gandhi and Nehru, and rightly so, because that's how it has to be. There has to be lots and lots of retellings of history. But this man whom you deride every day, whom you support also every day in your rallies, if someone, a young man or woman of India, is just so sparked by this, what the hell is this on raucous television debates every night we are discussing about? Where can I go and read a book? There is no book, and a 1960 book which largely written at his behest, because that person was close to Savarkar. It cannot be completely, it's more of a hagiography than anything. So that total lack of, even the person you want to calumnize, you don't even think of writing and putting that intellectual effort into it. Now, I'd want to ask you one question in the larger context of history, and since it's close to probably the work you do, is with the Ram Janma Bhoomi, and that's so very pertinent to what we're talking. The politics and the politicians and their roles, etc., we know very well. But as somebody who's also worked closely, with the case and so on, what is the role of the historians who played such a dubious role in the Ram Janmabhoomi issue? You would probably have some insight.
There is no dubious role. They were outright lies by historians. As I said, there are texts which they whitewash. Even today, as you said, they whitewash Kashi Vishwanath. They just whitewash history. And as I said, जय श्री राम के नारे लग चुके हैं, अब हर हर महादेव के नारे लगने चाहिए, because you are just whitewashing texts. It's not interpretation. I can understand you have different interpretations on something which is in your mind or my mind. This is documented. What you have written in your book is your document, right? Yeah. People are whitewashing. If tomorrow people start hiding what you have written, penned down, that is a crime. I mean crime in the sense of a historian as an author, and in this sense it's an absolute crime, because you wanted to, and you derided Sitaram Goel throughout his life for writing what he wrote, and you blocked him at so many levels because you want to have a hegemony, and that hegemony is being used for nefarious purposes, and that we can all see now. Supreme Court in the highest court of land in our country, has given an authoritative judgment completely contrary to all that you built. And I remember there are 1800 century cases by British court where the British judge said they have a claim, but it will lead to a law and order problem, so I'm not passing orders. They whitewashed that also. Judgments of the court, which said that Hindus have always fought for this land because they said BJP made it a movement, right? So if you have an 1886, I think, case where the British judge is saying that you are arguing it's Ram Janam Bhoomi, that predates BJP, Jansangh, that even predates RSS. Hindus were fighting there. So that is the level of whitewashing where you whitewash court documents. Mahinder Singh asked a very important question.
Which what Meenakshi Jain has put up in her book, The Battle for Rama. I think people need to read that book to understand the whole history of the historians who played a foul in this case.
It's not a foul. I say it's an outright crime. It's an outright agenda. It is, I'm sorry for using the word, but it is literally an Islamist agenda where you do not want to put out facts which you think will not benefit your audience. So that is not history. That is fiction. And you can write any fiction. Agenda. You know you're a fiction writer because you can write any fiction. Interesting question. Firstly, Vansa Bali says, I'm buying your book after hearing this talk. So
thank you. That was not the intention, though.
It's always a good thing to sell and sell more. And Mahinder Singh says, can you write books for third to it? But problem, and I would want to add a question to what Mahinder Singh says. The problem why I come back to textbooks is, for most people, Vikram, what they read in school is what they read. After that, आप रोटी कमाने में busy हो जाते हो, शादी करते हो, परिवार है, माँ बाप हैं. Who has the time? Very few have the luxury of reading after you have gone out for school. Let's forget the upper middle class. How many have the luxury of finding time to read a book? Or those who are not into the economic welfare, are activists or social workers. You don't have the time. So these textbooks, that is why the government role becomes very important, because I know so many of my friends in business families who are intelligent people, but they would not have read a book now in 10, 15, 20 years. And book reading is also a habit. Once you're out of the habit, I don't see them now sitting down with a book and reading a book. That is why history in textbooks is very important. And can, as somebody said, some attempts be made to have this history for kids outside this textbook regime, or you think that is not going to lead us anywhere? Or how do we have that regime if we try to have it?
So honestly, I don't have the answer as to what are all the different other media. You see, it's like asking a lawyer how to fight COVID. Na? So that's a completely a medical field. You have professionals who deal only with that. Now, my expertise or the lack of it or whatever is in research and writing books. Now, how that material can be used in different other ways, as I said, through maybe social media, through YouTube, through other kinds of media, through OTT platforms or whatever, to make it appealing to the to a 3rd to 8th standard student, a boy or girl. I think that other people need to also. So it needs to be a concerted effort. Everything, the entire onus cannot be put on a poor writer or a historian to do all of that. You can't do this and that. You can ferret out. You can go buy all the vegetables and bring it to the house and cut it and produce it. But then cooking it in different ways or making different dishes out of it, that is, I think, left to each professional. I actually want to also, we spoke about the Babri thing. So I was reading the other day and I just came across this lovely thing from Dr. K.K. Mohammed. The former regional director of the Archaeological Survey of India. Yeah, and in his autobiography in Malayalam, Nyan Enna Bharatiyan, I am an Indian, he talks specifically, and this has come out now with the excavation, and you're seeing the remains of the Hindu temple there. So he said the remains of the Hindu temple were found by excavators headed by B.B. Lal, the famous Dr. B.B. Lal, right in 1976-77. And he actually, it's such a strong indictment by someone of the insider who says, and I quote him here, the Babri issue would have been settled long ago if the Muslim intelligentsia had not fallen prey to the brainwashing of leftist historians. a set of historians, including Romila Thapar, Bipin Chandra, and S. Gopal, argued that there was no mention of the dismantling of the temple before the 19th century, and that Ayodhya is a Buddhist Jain center. They were actually supported by the historians Irfan Habib, R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, Suraj Bhan, and Akhtar Ali. It was they who connived with the extremist Muslim groups to derail all attempts to find an amicable solution to the masjid issue. Some of them even took part in several government-level meetings and supported the Babri Masjid Action Committee. They even tried to mislead the Allahabad High Court. Even after the verdict, they were unwilling to accept. Irfan Habib always went to the extent of stifling the voices of those who disagreed with him, unquote. So, the pernicious role, and since we're talking of history, it's not just the subject that we get bored of in school. Look at the contemporary relevance, where it can intrude and cause a riot if and a pogrom in this country, or a carnage, or whatever you call, if it is handled in an ineffective way by crooks with an agenda, which I think it's high time now, with when things are there to see. People like this need to be named and shamed, saying, what were you feeding us for all these years? And you then become the main cause for all the lost lives from 1990 onwards, when the Mandir movement started.
Vikram, while I have met Mr. K.K. Mohammed and had a few conversations with him, and while I have a lot of respect and yeoman service he did for the movement, I don't agree with this interpretation. The first few lines you said, interpretation, because this is his opinion. What he has done in archaeology is fact. This is his opinion that these authors are to be blamed for misguiding Muslim intelligentsia by hiding the facts that it was a pre-existing mandir. That's the sum of his argument on Muslim intelligentsia. What he did in archaeology is, who's hiding the facts on Kashi Vishwanath? That's a text. That's a farman. How many Muslim intelligentsia you have coming forward and saying something reconciliatory on it?
Yeah.
So it is to give too much credit to the Romila Thapars or Irfan Habibs of the world, that the Muslim intelligentsia was misled by them. They were the tools of this movement. They were not the creators of this movement. They were tools. Irfan Habib, Romila Thapar were tools. To call them the creators of this movement is again to save the actual creators of the movement. Because if facts were important, then Aurangzeb's Farman is a fact. What has happened on it? Yeah. So there I don't agree with his interpretation of mindsets. But what he has done on archaeology, obviously, immense amount of respect to him. That is my opinion, but as if many opinions should be there. So facts don't matter in this, because it's agenda-driven. It's not fact-driven. I bet if it was Somnath Mandir today to be rebuilt, there would be problems on that also by people. That is why it is so important to correct history. Whenever you get the opportunity to correct history might not be a word you as a historian agree with, because you may say there are multiple interpretations, but put out the other history at least when you have the time to do it. Else we all will keep on suffering.
True.
And Vikram, thank you so much for your time today. And even the Chinese...
We've actually logged 2 hours, and it didn't seem like that. So and I hope the audience also thought so.
yes, absolutely. And as we can't quote Chinese nowadays, but on history, I would like to say something what a Chinese premier said when asked to him, what's your opinion on French Revolution? He was asked in 1970 or 60s, something. He said, it's too early to say.
Good one.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Ishkaran. It was really, really wonderful, and thank you for inviting me. It was, as I said, 2 hours just went past without even realizing that we had spoken for so long, and I think charted a lot of territory, right? I mean, in terms of the past, present, and the future of Indian history writing, so to say, and what are the pitfalls. I hope it at least inspires some people on various fronts, those who are who want to write, who want to read, who want to support projects, and of course wakes up our wonderful government from its long slumber when it comes to these matters. And 4 years are still around. So maybe, even as we fight China, COVID, and all of that, which are, of course, most important, not lose sight of something so fundamentally intrinsic to Indianness and our identity.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck for your book. Hope to see it very, very soon.
Thank you, Ishkaran. Thank you so much. Bye.